The wagon wheel dropped into a rut with a crack that shot up Clara's spine. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting the alkali dust that coated her mouth, her clothes, her entire being. It had been 2 days since she left the train, and near 4 weeks since she fled Philadelphia. The driver, a man named Hatcher with tobacco stains in his beard, grunted. "Almost there, miss." She wanted to correct him. She was not a miss, she was a Mrs., but both of those names belonged to a woman who was dead, or might as well be. The woman who sat on this wagon buckboard, huddled in a thin wool coat, was Miss Clara Gray. The name felt foreign, a flimsy shield against the vast, empty sky of the Wyoming Territory. Laramie Junction was not a town. It was a wound, a collection of raw lumber buildings huddled against the railroad tracks, bracing themselves against a wind that had not stopped blowing since she arrived. It smelled of coal smoke, manure, and frying meat. "Mr. Hatcher pulled the mules to a stop outside a general store. "This is it. Thorne said he'd be in for supplies around noon." Clara climbed down, her legs stiff and weak. She paid the man his $4, nearly all she had left, and watched him drive away without a backward glance. She was alone, truly, finally alone. She adjusted the bonnet that hid her hair the color of dark honey, which the judge had liked to touch. She pushed the thought away, hard. She entered the store. It was dim, smelling of coffee beans, cured leather, and lye soap. A thin woman behind the counter eyed her. "Help you?" "I am looking for Mr. Thorne. I was told he required a housemaid." The woman's expression soured. "Levi Thorne, he requires something, but I doubt it's cleaning. You ain't from here." "No, ma'am, I came from the East." "We get a lot of girls from the East," the woman said, her voice flat. "Most don't last the winter. He's in the back, settling his account." The floorboards creaked as Clara walked toward the rear of the store. She saw him before he saw her. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, wearing a stained canvas coat. He was arguing with the proprietor in a low voice, a rumble she felt more than heard. "I paid for barley, Hatcher, not dust," he said. "Times are hard, Levi. They're about to get harder if you keep cheating me." He turned, and his eyes found her. Clara froze. She had expected a ruffian, a drunkard. This man was something else. He was not old, perhaps 35, but his face was weathered far beyond his years. His hair was dark, overgrown, and his eyes were the color of a winter sky. But it was the stillness in him that held her. He looked at her not as a man looks at a woman, but as a wolf assesses a threat. "Mr. Thorne?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He did not answer. He looked at Hatcher. "This her?" "This is Miss Gray. She's inquiring about the position." Levi Thorne looked back at Clara. His gaze traveled from her worn boots to the high collar of her dress and lingered on her face. She felt exposed, as if he could see the bruises on her soul. "Can you work?" he asked. His voice was rough, like gravel. "I can... Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you hold your tongue?" Clara flushed. "I am quiet by nature, sir." He stared at her for another long moment, then nodded once. He threw a few coins on the counter. "My wagon is outside. Be in it." He walked past her, brushing her shoulder. A jolt went through her, sharp and unwelcome. He smelled of cold air, hoarse, and something metallic, like iron. The ride to the ranch was silent. The land grew emptier with every mile. The brittle grasslands stretched to the horizon, brown and dead. The trees that lined a dry creek bed were skeletons, their branches clawing at the pale sky. The wind bit at her face, sharp and personal. This land did not want people. It wanted to scour them away. It felt as cruel and lonely as the men who inhabited it. The ranch house was not a house. It was a box, a 2-story structure of raw pine, hunkered down against the vastness, with a barn and a few outbuildings nearby. There was no garden, no paint, no softness, only function. Levi pulled the wagon up and jumped down. Stove is inside. Room is upstairs. Water is from the well. Wood is in the shed. I take supper at 6. He began to unhitch the horses, his movements economical and strong. He did not offer her a hand. He did not look at her again. Clara took her small carpet bag and walked into the house. It was cold. The main room held a table, 2 chairs, a cold fireplace, and shelves of tinned goods. The air was still, smelling of wood smoke, old leather, and a deep, abiding solitude. She went upstairs. Her room was small, containing a narrow cot, a washstand, and a single window that looked out onto the endless brown. She sat on the cot. The silence was absolute, broken only by the screaming of the wind under the eaves. She thought of the parlors of Philadelphia, the gas lights, the rustle of silk. She thought of her father's face, cold with disappointment. She thought of the judge, his wet mouth, his heavy hands. She pressed her palms against her eyes. She had not escaped. She had just traded one prison for another. This one was larger, colder, and infinitely more empty. Clara Whitmore was gone. Clara Gray had work to do. She was a good worker. She was quiet, observant, and efficient. She rose before the sun. When the air was so cold it burned her lungs, she fought the iron stove, coaxing it to life. She boiled coffee, strong and black, the way he seemed to like it. She scrubbed the pine floors until her knuckles were raw. She learned to bake bread that was not heavy as a stone. She mended his torn shirts, her stitches small and neat. She worked to make herself tired. She worked so that she would not have to think. And he watched her. Levi Thorne was a man of shadows. He was gone most of the day, riding the fences, checking his small herd of cattle, preparing for the winter. But when he was in the house, his presence was a weight. He would sit at the table cleaning tack, his hands rough and calloused, moving with surprising dexterity over the leather. He would clean his rifle, the metallic click and slide of the mechanism echoing in the quiet room. He rarely spoke. A pass the salt at supper, a more coffee in the morning. But he watched. Clara felt his eyes on her back as she washed the dishes. She felt his gaze as she swept the floor. It was not the leering look of the men in town, or the possessive inventory of the judge. It was something else. It was darker, more complex. It was the look of a man who had seen too much and trusted nothing. There was tension between them. It was not just the pull of a man and a woman alone in a small space. It was the friction of 2 wounds, bumping against each other in the dark. She was running from a past that had tried to consume her. He was anchored to a past that had clearly broken him. She could see it in the way he never fully relaxed, the way he always sat with his back to a wall, the way his eyes scanned the horizon as if expecting an attack. One afternoon, she found him by the corral. He was shirtless. She stopped, her hand halfway to her mouth. She had been bringing him a dipper of water. He had been out since noon, replacing a fence post rotted at the base. The sound of his sledgehammer had been a dull, steady punctuation to the howl of the wind. He was leaning against the rail, breathing hard. The wind was cold, but sweat ran in channels through the dust on his chest and back. He was not a soft man. He was built of hard muscle and bone, functional and powerful. His back was a map of old miseries, a web of white scars, long and thin, crisscrossed his shoulders. She recognized the mark of a whip, and lower, near his ribs, the puckered, angry scar of an old bullet wound. He was working at his forearm. A sliver of wood from the post, thick as her finger, had driven itself deep into the flesh. He was trying to dig it out with the point of his knife, his face tight with pain, blood welling dark against his skin. Clara did not move. She just looked. She looked at the strength in his arms, the tension in his shoulders, the geography of his pain. She saw a man built for hardship, A man who knew violence. A man who was, in that moment, undeniably human. He must have felt her gaze. He turned his head slowly. His eyes met hers. He did not move to cover himself. He did not flush with modesty or anger. He just held her stare. He saw her looking. He saw the shock in her eyes. And perhaps something else. Something she dared not name. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. There was only the sound of the wind, the metallic creak of the windmill, and the drip of his blood onto the dirt. It was not a shared moment. It was a confrontation. He was daring her to speak, to pity him, to react. Clara swallowed, the dust in her throat making it hard. She walked forward slowly, holding out the dipper. Her hand was trembling. "You are bleeding," she said. It was a stupid thing to say. He looked from her face to the dipper. He did not take it. He turned back to his arm, his jaw set. "Let me," she said, surprising herself. "I can get that. I can handle it." His voice was a low growl. "You are making it worse. You will get blood poisoning." She set the dipper on the rail and reached into the pocket of her apron for the small sewing kit she always carried. She pulled out a long, sharp needle. He watched her. His eyes narrowed. "What do you think you are doing?" "Hold still, or you will lose the arm." She stepped closer, into his space. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. She smelled his sweat, the clean, sharp scent of pine from the post, and the copper of his blood. She took his wrist. His skin was rough, hot. He did not pull away, but he tensed, every muscle in his body going rigid. "Be still, Mr. Thorne." She did not wait for his permission. She put her thumb on one side of the wound, her forefinger on the other, and squeezed. He hissed as the sliver pushed itself further out. Then, quick and sure, she slid the needle under the wood and levered it out. It was done in a second. Blood ran freely now. Clara took the handkerchief from her apron and pressed it hard against the wound. They stood like that for a long time, her small and pale, holding the arm of this large, half-naked man, him staring down at the top of her head, his breathing still rough. She could feel the pulse in his wrist, strong and steady against her fingers. Finally, she looked up. His face was inches from hers. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "It needs to be cleaned," she whispered. He pulled his arm back, slow but definite. He took the handkerchief from her, his fingers brushing hers. It was like being touched by fire. "I'll finish this," he said. He picked up the dipper of water, downed it in 2 swallows, and turned back to the fence post, his back to her. He did not put his shirt on. Clara walked back to the house, her knees weak. The silence he had left in his wake was deafening. It spoke of things that had no words, of a line that had been crossed without either of them moving. The argument happened 2 nights later. A cold snap had moved in, bringing with it a driving, icy rain. The world outside the small house was a misery of mud and noise. The rain hammered the roof, and the wind moaned like a dying thing. Clara had served supper, beef stew, thick and hot. Levi ate without comment, as usual. The tension that had been simmering since the incident at the corral was now a palpable thing. The air crackled with it. She was clearing the dishes when he spoke. "The sorrel mare is sick. She is going to foal too early. I'll need your help." Clara stopped, a plate in her hand. "Help? With a horse?" "She's down. I cannot turn her myself. I need you in the barn." Clara's stomach tightened. The barn was his space. It was dark, full of shadows and smells she did not understand, and the thought of being in that enclosed space, with him, with a dying animal. Mr. Thorne, I was hired as a housemaid. I do not know anything about livestock. I cannot—" He stood up, shoving his chair back. The sound was violent in the small room. "You cannot, or you will not?" I am not able. It is not my duty." His face darkened. He took a step toward her. "Your duty? You think you are back east, in some fine house, arguing over polish. This is Wyoming. Miss Gray. Out here, your duty is to survive. That horse is worth more than you are. You will help." "No." The word was out before she could stop it. It was small, but definite. It was the first time she had ever truly defied a man. His eyes went cold. "Then you are of no use to me, or anyone else." The words hit her like a slap. No use. It was what her father had said. It was what the judge had implied. Useless. Ruined. Something inside her snapped. The fear that had lived in her gut for months turned to a cold, hard rage. "Then I will leave," she said, her voice shaking. "Leave?" He gave a short, harsh laugh. "Look outside. You will not last an hour." "That is my concern, not yours." She threw the plate into the wash basin. It shattered. They both stared at the broken pieces. Clara turned and ran up the stairs. She pulled her carpet bag from under the cot. She did not have much to pack. Her spare dress, her nightgown, the small box of letters from her sister she had hidden under a floorboard. She was tying her bonnet, her fingers fumbling with the ribbons, when she heard him move, not toward the stairs, toward the front door. The sound of his boots on the porch. He was going to the barn. She hurried down. The main room was empty, lit only by the low glow of the stove. The rain was a torrent. She grabbed her coat. She would not go to the barn. She would walk. She would walk back to Laramie Junction. She would freeze. It did not matter. It was better than this. Better than him. Better than being useless. She ran out the door and into the storm. The wind and rain hit her instantly, stealing her breath. The mud sucked at her boots. She stumbled, catching herself, and pushed on toward the road. She made it as far as the barn. The large door slid open with a rumble, spilling yellow lantern light into the downpour. Levi stood in the opening, blocking her path. He was a dark silhouette against the light. "Get back in the house. Clara!" It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded wrong in his mouth. Too intimate. "Let me pass. Mr. Thorne." "You are a fool." "I am leaving. You cannot keep me here." She tried to move around him. He stepped in front of her. "I said, get back in the house." "No." She pushed at his chest. It was like pushing against a stone wall. He grabbed her arms. His grip was iron. He half dragged, half lifted her out of the rain and into the barn, sliding the heavy door shut behind them. The world went quiet. The roar of the storm was muffled, replaced by the sound of the rain drumming on the roof, the nervous stamp of the horses in their stalls, and the pained, low groan of the dying mare in the back. The barn was warm, thick with the smell of hay, manure, and wet animals. Clara was breathing hard, her bonnet knocked back, her hair coming undone. He still had hold of her arms. "Let go of me," she panted. "Not until you stop acting like a child. You have no right. You do not own me." "I own your wages, which you have not earned. I saved you from freezing. And this is how you repay it? By trying to kill yourself on my land." "I would rather be dead than stay here with you." The words hung in the air. His grip tightened. He pulled her closer, his face dark with an emotion she could not read. It was not just anger. It was something deeper, something raw. "You do not mean that," he whispered. "I do." He stared at her, his eyes searching her face. He was too close. She could feel the heat of his body, see the pulse hammering in his throat. And then it happened. It was not violent. It was not planned. It was raw and unexpected. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a kiss of frustration, of anger, of a terrible, unspoken need. His mouth was hard, demanding. He tasted of the cold rain and coffee. Clara's mind went blank. She was frozen for a second, shocked. Then her hands came up and she pushed against his chest. hard. "No!" She shoved him away. Levi stumbled back a step, looking as stunned as she felt. He stared at her, his breathing harsh. He looked down at his own hands, as if he did not know what they had done. Clara was trembling, her whole body shaking. She backed away from him, her hand flying to her mouth. She was breathless, confused. She was terrified, but as the terror washed over her, she realized, with a shock, that it was not entirely of him. She was not frightened that he would hurt her, not in the way the judge would have. She was frightened of the feeling he had ignited, a dark, hot spark in the cold emptiness of her life. He took a step toward her. "Clara, stay away from me," she whispered. She fumbled for the barn door, slid it open just enough to slip out, and ran. She did not stop until she was back in the house, in her room. The door bolted. She fell onto the cot, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She did not sleep. She lay in the cold, listening to the rain on the roof and the sound of her own ragged breathing. Sometime before dawn, the rain stopped. Exhaustion pulled her under, into a dark, suffocating sleep. She dreamed of the east. She was in a parlor, silk rustling. A man's hand, heavy with a gold ring, rested on her arm. The judge, he was smiling, but his eyes were cold. He smelled of brandy and cigars. Whispers surrounded her. Scandal, ruined, her father's disgrace. The man's hand tightened on her arm. "You will do as you are told. Clara, a wife has no say. A wife has no will but her husband's." She tried to pull away. The whispers grew louder, shameless, tainted. Her mother's face, pale and distant. "You have ruined us all." Her younger sister, crying in the hall. The judge's face loomed closer. "You are mine. There is nowhere you can run." Clara woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in the narrow cot. She was shaking. The dream clung to her like spider webs. The room was gray with the first weak light of morning. It was bitterly cold. The past was not done with her. It would never be done. She heard movement downstairs, the scrape of a boot, the clink of the stove lid. Levi. Her stomach turned to ice. She could not face him. Not after last night, not with the dream so fresh. She buried her face in her hands. A single, dry sob escaped her. Then another. She muffled the sound with her blanket. She had not cried since she left Philadelphia. She had not allowed herself to. But now, the dam broke. The shame, the fear, the crushing loneliness. It all came pouring out. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes burned. When she finally came downstairs, the sun was up. She was pale, her eyes swollen and red, but her face was composed. She wore her mask of quiet efficiency. Levi was at the table, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked up as she entered. His face was grim, his jaw tight. He looked as if he had not slept either. He saw her face. He saw the ravages of the night. His eyes lingered on her red-rimmed eyes. Clara braced herself for an apology, for a threat, for a dismissal, for him to mention what had happened in the barn. He said nothing. He did not ask why she had been crying. He did not ask if she was well. He just watched her for a long, silent moment. Then he looked down at his coffee. Clara moved to the stove, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for the pot. He cleared his throat. "The mare died." "I am sorry," she whispered. "The foal, too." He stood up and pulled on his coat. He paused at the door. She kept her back to him, waiting for him to leave. But he did not leave, not right away. He stayed nearby all day. He did not ride out to the fences. He worked in the yard, mending tack on the porch, splitting wood in the shed, sharpening his tools. He was always in her line of sight. He was not comforting her. He was not protecting her. He was just there, a solid, silent presence in the vast, cruel landscape. It was, she realized, the only thing he knew how to offer. And it was, perhaps, the only thing she could have accepted. The kiss in the barn changed nothing, and it changed everything. A wall of silence, thicker than pine, rose between them. They did not speak of it. They did not look at each other for 2 full days. Clara cooked, Levi worked. The small house was full of a silence that screamed. Then, slowly, the routine shifted. It was not a truce. It was a realignment, like a broken bone settling in a new, crooked way. Levi gave her more to do. He was testing her, or perhaps testing himself. He brought in a heavy, leather-bound ledger and dropped it on the table. "You can cipher?" he asked, not looking at her. "I can. The accounts for the general store are wrong. They charged me for feed I never got. I marked the pages." He left the book and went out. Clara opened it. The pages were full of his dark, forceful script, numbers slashed onto the paper, but there were mistakes. Simple addition. He was a man who could build a fence and set a bone, but he could not make the numbers balance. She spent the afternoon by the window, the low winter light falling on the page. She found the errors. She corrected them in her own neat, precise hand. It was a relief, this small piece of a world she understood. When he returned at dusk, he picked up the ledger. He ran his thumb over her script. He said nothing, but the next week, he brought her the inventory for the entire ranch. He kept her close. He found reasons to be in the house, a place he had always seemed to avoid. He spent an evening mending a bridle in the main room, the sharp smell of leather oil filling the air. Clara sat across from him, darning one of his socks. The silence stretched between them. It was no longer the screaming silence of anger. It was a heavy, watchful quiet. He did not know what he wanted from her. She was a splinter under his skin. He had lived alone for almost 10 years. His world reduced to cattle, wind, and the ghosts of the war. He had built his solitude like a fortress. Now, this woman, this slip of a thing from the east, was inside his walls. He had kissed her. He had crossed a line he swore he would never cross. He was a man who understood violence. He did not understand this. He did not understand the need that rose in his throat when he saw her hanging laundry in the wind, her face raw with the cold. He could not let her go. The thought of her walking that road to Laramie Junction, of her being in that town with those men, it lit a cold fire in his gut. He was not protecting her. He was hoarding her. Clara felt his presence like a brand. He was almost too close. He would stand near her at the stove, reaching for the coffee pot, his arm brushing hers. She would flinch, and he would pull back, his jaw tight. She was a prisoner, but the nature of her prison had changed. It was no longer just the ranch. It was him. One night, long after he had gone to his own room downstairs, she sat at the table. The house was dead quiet, only the wind crying around the corners. She pulled a single sheet of paper from her bag, a pen, and the small bottle of ink she had hoarded. By the light of one candle, she began to write. "My dearest Anne." She stopped, the pen hovering. It had been months since she had written her sister's name. Guilt washed over her, cold and sharp. "I do not know if this will ever reach you. I do not know if I will ever send it. But I must write the truth, if only to see it plain myself. I am alive. I am in the Wyoming Territory. I am safe. For now." She paused, biting her lip. The next words were harder. "You must not believe what they said of me. Father was wrong. He was so wrong. He wanted the judge's influence. He wanted the money. He sold me. Anne, he called it a marriage. The judge was a good man in public, but he was not a good man. He was twice my age. He was cruel. He did not want a wife. He wanted a possession." The pen trembled in her hand. She took a deep, ragged breath. "That night, he had been drinking. He came to my room. He put his hands on me. He said it was his right. I fought him. I struck him with the water pitcher. He bled, and he called the servants. He told them I had assaulted him, that I was mad. Mother, she believed him, or she chose to believe him. It was easier. She looked at me, at my torn dress, and she said, "You have ruined us. You are ruined." I left with nothing. I took the housekeeping money and I ran. Your face at the window, your tears. It was the only true thing in that whole house. I am not ruined. Anne, I am just broken. I am living under a false name. Miss Clara Gray. I am a housemaid for a man named Levi Thorne. He is a hard man. He is as broken as this land. I do not know if I am more afraid of him, or of the past that is chasing me. She looked at the words. Ruined, broken. She folded the letter, hot tears blurring the ink. She did not sign it. She blew out the candle and went upstairs, slipping the letter under the loose floorboard with the others. It was not a letter. It was a confession she could not send. The tension on the ranch grew with every passing day. The sky was a hard, bright blue, but the cold was a physical weight. The wind had teeth. Clara felt a desperate, rising panic. She could not stay. She could not be this man's servant, his prisoner, the object of his dark, unspoken hunger. The kiss in the barn had been a brand, and she felt it burning. She had to leave. She had to try again. She waited for a day when he rode out to the south pasture to check on the herd. He said he would be gone until dark. She worked quickly. She packed her small bag, her spare dress, her letters. She took a loaf of bread from the pantry and a dried strip of beef. She put on her coat and bonnet. She did not know where she would go. Laramie Junction, and from there, she would get on a train, any train, and go further west, to California, to Oregon, to anywhere that was not here. She slipped out of the house. The air was so cold it stung her face. The sun was a pale wafer in the sky. She walked toward the road, her boots crunching on the frozen dirt. She made it as far as the barn. The great door slid open. Levi stood there. He was not gone. He was holding a broken axle strap in his hand. He must have returned for a tool. He saw her. He saw the bag in her hand. His face did not change. It went still. Utterly, terribly still. "Where are you going?" His voice was flat. "To town, Mr. Thorne. I am leaving." "No, you are not. You cannot stop me. You do not pay me enough to be a prisoner." "I pay you. I give you a roof." "I will not stay." She tried to walk around him. He moved, blocking her path. "Get out of my way." "Go back to the house. Clara." "No." She tried to push past him. He grabbed her arm. His grip was not gentle. It was hard. "Let go of me. Go back to the house." "I hate you!" she screamed, the words tearing out of her. She began to struggle, twisting in his grip, beating at his chest with her free hand. "I hate you! Let me go!" He was a man who knew his own strength, but he was also a man consumed by a sudden, black rage. A rage at her, at himself, at the fact that she was the one thing he could not control, and the one thing he could not lose. He did not realize his own power. He shoved her, hard, to stop her from hitting him. Clara stumbled back, hitting the rough plank wall of the barn with a solid, painful thud. The breath left her body. Her bag dropped to the ground. Levi was on her in an instant. He slammed his hand against the wall next to her head, the wood vibrating. He was breathing hard, his face inches from hers. He had trapped her. His body was a wall of muscle, caging her in. He was terrified. She could see it in his eyes. He was terrified of what he had just done. Clara was shaking, tears of pure, frustrated rage and fear streaming down her face. She was trapped by the judge, by her father, and now by this man. "Let me go," she whispered, her voice broken. "No," the word was a growl. "Why?" she cried, her voice rising to a desperate wail. "Why will you not let me go? Why can't I leave?" He stared at her. his eyes dark, his jaw working. He was a man drowning, and she was the only air. He could not answer with words. He did not have them. He did not have the words for the loneliness, for the war, for the years of silence. He only had this. He answered her with hunger. He crushed his mouth down on hers. This was not the first kiss. This was not anger. This was desperation. This was a starving man at a feast. It was hard and deep and absolute. It was a kiss of possession, but it was also a plea. Clara's mind went white, all the fight, all the fear. It dissolved into a single, shocking jolt of heat. Her hands, which had been pushing at his chest, suddenly gripped his shirt. She was falling, and he was the only solid thing in the world. She kissed him back. She did not know why. She was lost. She was ruined. She was broken. And his mouth on hers was a confession. He was broken, too. He deepened the kiss, one hand moving from the wall to her hair, his fingers tangling in the bun, pulling it loose. Her bonnet fell away. He groaned, a low, pained sound, and his other arm went around her waist, pulling her tight against him. She could feel the hard beat of his heart against her chest. She could feel the strength in his arms. She was terrified, and she wanted more. That was the thought that finally broke through. I want this. The terror of that realization was greater than her fear of him. She tore her mouth from his, pushing at him with all her strength. No, stop! Levi pulled back as if he had been shot. He looked at her, his eyes wide, his breathing ragged. He saw her tear-streaked face, her swollen mouth, her hair falling around her shoulders. And shame, a deep, profound shame, washed over his face. He looked at what he had done, at the woman he had pinned against the wall, at the force he had used. He stepped back, then back again, his hands dropping to his sides. He ran one hand through his hair, his whole body trembling. He turned away from her, leaning his forehead against a support beam. God help me, he whispered. He did not say it to her. He said it to the barn, to the world. Clara stood there, shaking. She could still feel the imprint of his body against hers, the taste of him on her tongue. She was more scared of herself than she had ever been of him. She fumbled for her bonnet, snatching it from the dusty floor. She did not bother with her bag. She turned and fled the barn, running back to the small, cold house. She bolted the door. That night the world changed. The silence that fell was different. It was not anger. It was dread. They did not eat supper together. Clara left a plate on the table, but he never came in to eat it. The next morning, the sky was a sick, yellowish gray. The air was completely still. There was no wind. It was the most unsettling silence she had ever heard. Levi came to the door, his face grim. He had not slept. "Bring in all the firewood you can carry," he said, his voice flat. "Fill the water buckets. Fill everything. Now." "Why? What is it?" "A blizzard. It is going to be a bad one." She did not argue. She worked. For 2 hours. They worked in the eerie, breathless quiet. They stacked firewood in the main room until it reached the ceiling. They filled every pot and pail with water from the well. Just after noon, the wind started. It was a low moan from the north. Within an hour, it was a scream. Then the snow came. It did not fall in flakes. It came sideways, a solid wall of white that erased the world. The barn, the corral, the hills, they vanished. Clara stood at the window, watching, until the glass was caked with ice and she could see nothing. The house grew dark. The wind hammered at the walls. It was not a sound. It was a physical force, a giant hand trying to crush the small house. They were trapped. For 2 days, the world was only the storm. The wind never stopped. It shrieked, it howled, it moaned. The house shuddered. The cold was bone deep, a living thing that seeped through the walls. They fed the fire, they drank coffee, They did not speak. The small room became their entire universe. The tension from the barn was still there. A third person in the room. It was thick, suffocating. They moved around each other. Ghosts in a small cage. He sat in his chair, cleaning his rifle, his movements a defense. She sat at the table, mending a shirt, her stitches a wall. On the third night, the storm reached its peak. The wind sounded like a freight train passing an inch from the house. Suddenly, there was a sound, a crack, a groan, and a heavy crash from outside. Levi was on his feet in an instant. The shed roof. Clara jumped, her heart in her throat. He grabbed his coat. "Stay here." "No," she said, pulling on her own. "You cannot go alone. You will be lost." "I said stay." "And I said no." He stared at her for a second, then nodded. He tied a rope from the porch railing to his waist. He handed her the other end. "Do not let go." He opened the door. The storm lunged in. A tidal wave of snow and ice and noise exploded into the room, extinguishing the lantern. They were in darkness, save for the red glow of the stove. They fought their way out. The snow was waist-deep. The wind tore the breath from her lungs. It was impossible to see, impossible to think. It was just a roaring, white chaos. The shed was only 20 yards away, but it took them 10 minutes to reach it. A large portion of the roof had collapsed under the weight of the snow. There was nothing they could do. It was lost. "We have to go back!" Levi shouted over the wind. He pulled her, and they fought their way back to the house, following the rope. They fell inside, slamming the door against the storm, collapsing to the floor, buried in snow, gasping for air. They lay there for a long time, the wind screaming outside, their ragged breathing filling the small room. Finally, Levi stood. He relit the lantern. They were both covered in snow, their hair frozen, their faces red and raw. Clara fumbled with her gloves, her fingers numb. Levi watched her. He was standing by the fire, the light playing on his harsh features. The adrenaline, the cold, the days of suffocating tension, it all broke. He looked at her, at this small, stubborn woman who had followed him into the heart of a blizzard. "Clara," he said. His voice was rough. "Go upstairs. Go to bed." She shook her head. She could not stop shaking. She was so cold. "Clara, do not." She looked up at him. Her hair was coming undone, wet with melted snow. Her eyes were wide, dark with a fear that was no longer just fear. She was tired. She was tired of running. She was tired of being cold. She was tired of being alone. She took one step toward him. "Do not," he whispered again. It was a plea. She took another step. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the heat from his body. She looked up into his face, and she put her hands on his chest. A sound broke from him, a groan of pain, of surrender, of something that had been caged for a decade. His arms went around her, pulling her against him. He buried his face in her wet hair. "You should not," he muttered. "I am not a good man." "I am not a good woman," she whispered. He lifted her then. His arms were like steel. He did not carry her gently. He carried her as if he was rescuing her from a fire. He took her up the narrow stairs to her small, cold room. The cot groaned under their weight. Their lovemaking was not gentle. It was not kind. It was desperate. It was half war, half prayer. It was two broken, lonely people clinging to each other in a storm, seeking a warmth that was more than just skin. It was a raw, bruising collision, a frantic confirmation that they were, against all odds, still alive. Afterward, the silence that fell was absolute. The storm still howled, but it seemed distant. Clara was curled on her side, her back to him. The thin blanket was pulled up to her chin. A single silent sob shook her body, then another. She was crying. Levi sat on the edge of the cot. He was still dressed. His hands, which had been so rough, so demanding, were now clenched into fists on his knees. He stared at her narrow, shaking back. He did not know what to do. He was a man of fences, of horses, of guns. He had no words for this. He had no comfort to offer. He had just taken the one thing she had left. He wanted to touch her shoulder. He wanted to pull her back against him, but he was afraid. His hands were built to break, not to mend. He was afraid he would only hurt her more. He stood up, his knees cracking in the cold. She did not move. She did not make a sound, except for the small, hitching breaths. "I will," he started. He stopped. "I will check the fire." He turned and walked out of the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara was left alone in the dark, crying as the blizzard tried to tear the world apart. The blizzard broke on the fourth morning. The world was reborn in a terrible, blinding white. The silence was absolute, as if the storm had scoured all sound from the sky. Clara woke alone in her cot. The house was cold. She heard the scrape of a shovel outside. She dressed, her movements stiff. Her body ached. She felt ashamed and empty, and strangely, profoundly alive. When she went downstairs, the main room was empty. She looked out the window. Levi was digging a path to the barn, his back a rigid line, his breath pluming in the frigid air. The snow was piled higher than his head in drifts against the house. She built up the fire. She made coffee. She found a slab of bacon and began to slice it, her hands moving with a mechanical steadiness she did not feel. He came in an hour later, caked in snow, his face raw from the cold. He did not look at her. He kicked the snow from his boots on the porch and came to the stove, holding his red, chapped hands over the heat. Clara poured him a mug of coffee. She set it on the table, not next to him. "I shoveled a path to the well," he said, his voice a low rasp. "The woodshed is gone. We will have to use the wood stacked on the porch." "I have bacon frying," she said. It was a new rhythm, born of the storm, a domestic rhythm, layered over the raw, unspoken truth of what had happened upstairs. Everything was changed. The line between master and servant, between man and woman, had been erased and redrawn in a different, dangerous pattern. He ate at the table. She washed the dishes. The silence was heavy, but it was not the angry silence of before. It was a shared silence. They had been through the fire together, and it had marked them both. That afternoon, he went to the barn to check the horses. She followed him, bundled in her coat. The sorrel mare was gone, buried under the snow, but the two geldings were alive, hungry and nervous. He forked hay into their stalls. Clara took a bucket and broke the ice in the water trough, her hands aching with the cold. He stopped, watching her. "You do not have to do that." "It needs to be done," she said. She finished the task, her back to him. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Levi." It was the first time she had said his name. It felt heavy in her mouth. He went still. He did not turn around, but she knew he had heard. "The coffee is hot," she said, and walked back to the house. The world was frozen for a week. They were marooned on their island of snow. They worked, they ate, they survived. They did not touch. They did not speak of the storm or the night. But he slept in the house. He unrolled his bedroll on the floor by the fire. A silent guardian. He never went upstairs again. Clara lay in her cot, listening to the sound of his breathing below, and felt a strange, terrible sense of safety she had not known since she was a child. When the snow finally crusted over, hard enough to walk on, he took the wagon to town. Clara watched him go, a knot of dread in her stomach. The bubble they had lived in was about to burst. He returned at dusk with supplies and the mail. He dropped a sack of flour on the table and handed her a single, thin envelope. It was addressed to Miss Clara Gray, care of Levi Thorne. She did not recognize the handwriting. It was a precise, masculine script. The postmark was from Cheyenne. "Who is it from?" Levi asked. He was unlatching his coat. I do not know," she stammered. "Perhaps an old acquaintance." Her blood had turned to ice. She slipped the letter into her apron pocket, her hand trembling. "You have no acquaintances here," he said. It was a flat statement. "I will. Read it later." She busied herself with the supplies, her heart hammering. Later that night, when he was in the barn, she went to her room. With shaking fingers, she broke the seal. It was not a long letter. "To Miss Gray, formerly Mrs. Clara Whitmore of Philadelphia. Your presence in the Wyoming Territory has been noted. Your father, in his grief, and your husband, Judge Elias Thorne, in his concern for your welfare, have authorized associates to ensure your safe return. I am one such associate. I have been retained to locate you and facilitate this return. I am a reasonable man. I am prepared to offer you $500 in cash to return east without incident. If you refuse, I am authorized to use other means. Do not doubt my resolve. I am staying at the Union Hotel in Cheyenne and will be in Laramie Junction within the fortnight to discuss the matter. I strongly advise you to accept the generous offer. Jeremiah Cobb." Clara sank onto the cot. She could not breathe. A bounty hunter. Not just a bounty hunter, but a polite one. A reasonable one. That was the most terrifying part. He would not come with guns blazing. He would come with the law. Your husband, Judge Elias Thorne. He was still alive. She had hoped, in some dark part of her heart, that he might be dead. She folded the letter, her hands numb. She crept to the loose floorboard, pulled it up, and slipped the letter in with the others. She covered it, but it was not buried. It was a snake, waiting in the dark. She went downstairs. Levi was by the fire, oiling his rifle. He looked up. "You are pale as a sheet. What did the letter say?" "It was nothing," she lied, her voice thin. "A mistake, from a dressmaker I once knew." He stared at her. His eyes narrowed. He knew she was lying. He had lived with liars and thieves and broken men his whole life. He could smell a lie like he could smell rain. He did not push. He went back to his rifle. The click-clack of the oiled rag sliding through the barrel, the only sound in the room. The thaw brought mud, and the mud brought gossip. When Clara next went to the general store with Levi, the change was palpable. Mrs. Hatcher, the proprietor's wife, who had once been merely sour, was now openly hostile. She looked Clara up and down, her gaze lingering on Clara's waist. "Still here, are we?" "Mrs." Hatcher said, her voice loud enough for the two old men by the stove to hear. "The winter did not freeze you out." "I am still here, ma'am," Clara said quietly. Some girls have all the luck, finding a patron so quickly, especially a man like Thorne, who keeps to himself. The men by the stove snickered. Clara felt the blood rush to her face. The ruined girl from back east living with a man alone. Levi, who had been loading feed, came to the counter. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Mrs. Hatcher. He looked at her husband. "Put it on my account," he said. "Now, Levi," Mr. Hatcher began. "The missus just meant—" Levi placed his hand, his whole hand, flat on the counter. It was a large, scarred hand. He did not slam it down. He just placed it. The gesture was full of a terrible, quiet weight. "Put it on my account." Mr. Hatcher swallowed. "Yes, Levi, of course." They rode back in silence. Clara sat rigid on the wagon seat, staring straight ahead, her humiliation a hot coal in her stomach. He knew what they were saying. He had heard it, and he had done nothing. No, that was not true. He had defended her, not her honor. He had defended his property. That night, the tension returned, thick and sour. He was drinking. He rarely drank, but he had bought a bottle of whiskey in town, and he sat at the table, a tin cup in his hand, staring at the fire. Clara was sewing. She was trying to ignore him, but his presence was too large. "Why did you come here?" he asked, his voice rough. Clara's needle stopped. "I wanted work." He gave a short, harsh laugh. "There is work in Denver, in San Francisco. Why here? Why this place?" "It was as far as my money would take me." "You are running," he said. "From what?" "That is not your concern." "It is my concern," he said, turning to look at her, his eyes dark in the firelight. "They are talking in town. They are calling you my whore." Clara flinched, the word striking her like a physical blow. "I am not," she whispered. "Are you not?" he asked, his voice quiet, cruel. "You came to my room in the storm, or did I imagine that?" She stood up, the sewing basket tumbling to the floor. "How dare you?" "I dare," he said, standing as well. He was not drunk. He was just raw. "I dare because I live with it. I live with your secrets. I live with the lies you tell me, and I live with them calling you that." "It is not my fault." "Is it not? Who are you? Clara Gray? Who is chasing you?" "Stop it." "A husband? A father? A lover?" "I am not who you think I am." "I do not think anything," he said, stepping closer. "I just know." She backed away, her hands raised. "You know nothing about me." He was quiet for a long time. He looked down at the cup in his hand, then threw it against the stone of the fireplace. The tin clattered, whiskey spattering. "I know what it is to run," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know what it is to have men talk about you." He turned his back to her, bracing his arms on the mantel. "I had a brother," he said, his voice so low she barely heard him. "James. He was younger than me. 17. Clara stood frozen, watching his back. "We came home from the war, Tennessee. Our farm was gone, burned. Our PA was dead. It was just us. We tried to rebuild." He paused. His shoulders were bunched, tight with a pain that was decades old. There were men who had not fought, men who had stayed home and gotten rich off the war. They claimed our land. They said our PA owed them money. One day, they came for James. They said he was a traitor, like all of us. They hurt him. They hurt him bad. In the barn. Clara felt a cold dread creep up her spine. "I found him," Levi whispered. He was still alive. He told me who they were. 2 of them, their names, Ambrose and Cully." He was silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. "What did you do?" Clara asked, her voice shaking. He turned, very slowly. His face was a mask of old grief. "I did what had to be done. I found them. I did not. It was not a trial. I ended it." "You killed them." "I did." He said it simply, without pride, without shame. A fact. "I buried my brother, and I rode west. They never convicted me. They never even tried. But they never forgave me either. Every man in that town looked at me like I was a butcher. So I left." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face, looking for judgment. "That is why I came here, where there is no one, where the land does not care what you did, it only cares if you can survive." He had given her his truth, a piece of his broken, bloody past. Clara sank back into her chair, her legs weak. This was the man who had held her, a man who had killed 2 men with his bare hands. And she was not afraid. She felt a deep, aching pity and a strange, terrifying kinship. "Levi," she whispered. He shook his head, as if waking from a dream. "Go to bed, Clara. It is late." He unrolled his bedroll by the fire, his back to her. The confession was over. The next trip to town, she went alone. Levi needed to ride to the north pasture, and she insisted. She was not his prisoner. She needed supplies. She needed to prove to herself that she could still walk among people. It was a mistake. She was in Hatcher's store, her list almost full. It was late afternoon. A group of ranch hands from a neighboring outfit. The double bar came in. They were loud, half-drunk, smelling of whiskey and sweat. Clara kept her head down, moving to the counter. "Well, well," one of them said. He was a big man, with a red, pock-marked face. "Look what we have here. Thorne's pretty little housekeeper." The other men laughed. Clara ignored them, handing her list to Mr. Hatcher. Hatcher looked nervous, his eyes darting between Clara and the men. "Hurry, please," Clara whispered. "What is the rush, darling?" the red-faced man said. He stepped up beside her, his body odor overwhelming. "Thorne keep you that busy? Heard he is a cold man. Maybe you need someone to warm you up." He reached out, his filthy hand closing on her arm. Clara gasped, trying to pull away. "Do not touch me." "Feisty," he sneered, his grip tightening. "I like that." He yanked her, pulling her away from the counter and toward him. "Let her go, Silas." "Mr. Hatcher said, his voice weak. "Shut up, Hatcher. This ain't your business." Silas grabbed her other arm. He was breathing in her face. "Come on, sweet thing. Just one kiss." "No, get off me," Clara cried, struggling, her panic rising. This was the judge. This was the nightmare. "I said, let her go." The voice was not Levi's. It was cold, dead. Silas froze. He turned his head slowly. Levi was standing in the doorway. He did not have his rifle. He did not have his coat. He must have ridden in hard. His face was pale, his eyes flat and empty. "This ain't your concern, Thorne," Silas stammered, his bravado fading. He still had his hands on Clara. "Take your hands off her," Levi said. It was not a command. It was a statement of fact. Silas, emboldened by his friends, sneered. "Or what? You gonna stop me?" He made a fatal error. He shoved Clara back toward the counter and took a step toward Levi. It was over in seconds. Levi did not punch him. He moved like a snake. He grabbed Silas's outstretched arm, twisted it, and Clara heard a sharp, wet snap. Silas screamed, a high, thin sound. Levi did not stop. He spun the man around, his other hand grabbing Silas's throat. He slammed him back against the shelves. Tins of peaches and beans rained down. Levi's face was transformed. It was not the face of the man she knew. It was the face of the man who had been in Tennessee. It was the face of a killer. He began to hit Silas. His fists moved with a brutal, economical precision. He was not just hitting him. He was trying to break him. "Levi, stop!" Clara screamed. The other ranch hands, who had been frozen in shock, finally moved. "Get him off him! He is killing him!" They surged forward. Levi let go of the now unconscious Silas, who crumpled to the floor, his face a ruin. Levi turned to the other two. They stopped, seeing the look in his eyes. He did not look at them. He did not look at Hatcher. He looked at Clara. He strode over to her, grabbed her by the arm, the same arm Silas had held, and dragged her out of the store. "Levi, you are hurting me!" He did not seem to hear. He hauled her to the wagon, lifted her, and threw her onto the seat. He untied the horses and whipped them into a run. They did not slow until they were miles out of town. Clara was shaking with rage and fear. He had not saved her. He had claimed her. He had shamed her, just as Silas had. When they reached the ranch, she jumped from the wagon before it stopped, stumbling to the ground. "Do not ever," she panted, "put your hands on me like that again." He jumped down after her. His face was still dark, his knuckles split and bleeding. "Get in the house." "No, you do not own me," she shouted, her voice breaking. "I am not your property. I am not your whore. You had no right to do that." No right, he roared, the first time she had ever heard him yell. He had his hands on you. He was touching you. And you did the same. You dragged me out of that store like a sack of feed. You are no better than he is. The words hit him, and the rage drained from his face, leaving him looking hollowed out, broken. He stood there, his bloody hands at his sides, his chest heaving. I am not good, Clara, he said, his voice a low, ragged whisper. I know that. I am not a good man, but I do not want anyone else to touch you. The confession hung in the cold air between them. It was not an apology. It was a truth. It was a statement of his own dark, possessive need. It shattered her anger, leaving only the aching, terrible truth of their situation. She looked at him, at this violent, broken man who had killed for his brother and had nearly killed for her. She was no longer just afraid of him, or of her past. She was afraid of the bond between them. It was no longer just desire. It was need. It was a desperate, grasping need, as vital and as dangerous as air. She took a step toward him. He did not move. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his face. He flinched, but did not pull away. His skin was cold. You are bleeding, she whispered. He closed his eyes. Clara. She took his bloody hand and led him inside the house. She pushed him gently into a chair by the fire. She brought the wash basin, soap, and clean rags. She knelt in front of him and began to clean his wounds. He hissed as the lye soap bit into the raw flesh, but he did not pull away. He just watched her, his eyes full of a dark, painful hunger. When she was done, her hands were smeared with his blood. She did not stand up. He did not move. He reached out, his clean hand, and touched her hair, his fingers gentle. They fell into each other. It was not the frantic collision of the storm. It was something else. It was slower, deeper. It was a surrender. He pulled her onto his lap, his mouth finding hers, and the kiss was full of the salt of her tears and the iron of his blood. It was a kiss of shared damage, of a future that held no promises, only this, only the raw, undeniable need of one broken soul for another. Later that night, Clara lay in her cot, listening to him breathe by the fire. For the first time, she let herself imagine it, a life here, a life with this man, in this hard, empty land, a life where she was not Clara Whitmore, the ruined wife, or Clara Gray, the housemaid, just Clara. The thought was a small, warm candle in the darkness. But as she watched the firelight flicker on the ceiling, a cold dread crept back in. The letter, Mr. Cobb, the bounty hunter. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her past was not done with her. It was coming, and when it came, it would not just destroy her. It would destroy this man. It would destroy Levi, the law he had run from. She was bringing to his door, and his violence, the very thing that protected her, would be the thing that damned him. The fight in town settled nothing. It only drew the lines clearer. The fragile peace they had built was heavier now, weighted with his violence and her dependence. They moved through the days in a truce of shared labor. He mended the shed roof, his split knuckles healing slow. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended. Her mind 1,000 miles east, waiting for the sound of a horseman. The letter from Jeremiah Cobb was a living thing, hidden under her floorboards. It was a snake in the house. She knew, with the cold certainty of prey, that he would be in Laramie Junction soon. The fortnight he had mentioned was almost over. She had to tell Levi. It was not a choice. It was a necessity. She owed him the truth, not because he was her protector, but because she had tethered her fate to his. She was bringing the law and the past to the one place he had run to escape both. She waited until after supper. The fire was low. He was cleaning tack, his hands moving with that same restless strength. Levi! He looked up, his eyes wary. The quiet in her voice was new. She walked to the stairs, knelt, and pulled up the loose board. His gaze sharpened. He watched as she took out the small packet of letters, separating the one from Cheyenne. She did not hand it to him. She held it. "I am not Clara Gray," she said, her voice flat. He stopped his work. He did not speak. He just waited. "My name is Clara Whitmore. I was married." She laid the truth out like a body for burial. She told him about her father, about the ambition that led him to force a marriage. She told him about the judge, Elias Thorne, a man of power and cold appetites, a man twice her age. She told him about the night of the assault, the broken pitcher, the lie that followed. "He said I was mad. He said I attacked him. My own mother, she called me ruined." She told him about running, about the housekeeping money, about her sister Anne, crying at the window. And then, her voice dropping to a whisper, she told him about the letter. "He is a bounty hunter, hired by my husband. He is coming here. He offered me $500 to return." She finally held the letter out to him. He looked at it, but did not take it. He looked at her face. He was silent for a long, terrible minute. The only sound was the fire hissing. He was processing the words. Husband, bounty hunter, ruined. Clara braced herself. For the anger, for the disgust, for him to throw her out. He stood up, walked to the fireplace, and braced his arm against the mantel, his back to her. She watched the muscles in his shoulders bunch under his shirt. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low rumble, devoid of judgment. "Thorne, your husband's name is Thorne?" "Yes, Elias Thorne." "No relation," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He turned around. His face was not angry. It was hard, as if carved from stone. "So you are a married woman." "I am," she whispered, shame washing over her. "And you came to my room? In the storm." "Levi, He held up a hand. He was not accusing. He was just placing the facts. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face, seeing her not as Miss Gray, the quiet maid, but as Mrs. Whitmore, the fugitive. He took a step toward her. She flinched. "They called you ruined," he said. "Yes." He reached out, his rough thumb brushing her cheek, a gesture so unexpected it made her gasp. "You think I care what they called you?" The words undid her. He was not disgusted by the scandal. He was not angered by the lie. He had looked past the shame of it and seen only the fact. "But the bounty hunter, he is coming." "I know." The hardness returned to his face. "Men like that, they do not stop for $500. They stop when they are made to stop." "What will we do?" The word "we" slipped out, a desperate, unplanned sound. He looked away from her, toward the dark window. "My whole life, I have known one way to fix things. I ran from Tennessee. I will not run from here." He looked back at her. "But we can go south, to New Mexico. I have some money saved. We can ride out tonight. He will come to an empty ranch. We can disappear." He was offering her his future, such as it was. A life of running, but a life together. It was a terrible, beautiful temptation, to simply go, to let the name Clara Whitmore die in the Wyoming snow. She shook her head, the movement small, but definite. He frowned. "Why not? It is the only way." "No," she said, her voice gaining a small measure of strength. "I have been running since I left Philadelphia. I ran from my husband. I ran from my family. I tried to run from you. I am tired of running. Levi, if I run now, I will be running for the rest of my life. He will just hire another man." "So what? You will let him take you back?" "No, I will not, but I will not run either." "Then you are a fool," he said, his voice flat. "Because he will come, and he will bring the law, and they will take you. There is no other way." He grabbed his coat and left the house, slamming the door behind him. He did not sleep by the fire that night. He slept in the barn. A new, cold distance grew between them. He had offered her his only solution, and she had refused it. He saw it as stubbornness, as a rich girl's fantasy that the world would bend to her will. She saw it as the first real choice she had ever made. She was no longer his secret. She was his problem. 3 days later, the world ended. Clara had ridden to Laramie Junction with Levi. He was checking the freight office for a part for the wagon. She had insisted on coming, on not being a prisoner. She was at Hatcher's store, buying flour and salt, her hands steady, her face calm. She would not hide. She was counting out her coins when a woman entered the store. The woman was older, dressed in a severe black traveling suit, her face pinched and sour. She looked around the store, her gaze dismissive, until it landed on Clara. The woman's eyes widened. Her mouth fell open. "Mercy of God," the woman whispered. She took a step closer. "Mrs. Whitmore, Clara Whitmore." Clara froze. The blood drained from her face. She knew this woman. This was Mrs. Poole, her mother's housekeeper, a woman who had served her tea and judged her silently for years. "You are mistaken, ma'am," Clara said, her voice thin. "No," Mrs. Poole said, her eyes narrowing, all doubt gone. She looked Clara up and down, taking in her cheap calico dress, her worn boots. "It is you. We all thought you were dead. Or worse. Wait until Mr. Cobb hears of this. He is right here, in this very town." Mrs. Poole turned, her face alive with the malice of gossip, and bustled back out of the store, leaving Clara standing in a pool of sudden, cold silence. Mr. Hatcher was staring at her, his face pale. "Clara," he started. "That woman," she said. Clara did not wait. She dropped the coins on the counter, grabbed her packages, and fled. She ran down the muddy street to the freight office. Levi was just coming out. "He is here," she panted, grabbing his arm. "The bounty hunter. He is in town. A woman. A servant from my home. She saw me. She recognized me." Levi's face went blank. He grabbed her, his grip hard, and pushed her toward the wagon. "Get in." He did not speak on the ride home. He drove the horses hard, his eyes scanning the horizon, his jaw set so tight a muscle jumped. The confrontation she had been dreading was no longer about her past. It was about her present. When they got back to the ranch, he did not unhitch the horses. He followed her into the house. "You told me he was in Cheyenne," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He said he would be here in a fortnight. He is here now. And this woman, this servant, she knows you are here. With me." "Yes." He hit the table with his fist. The salt tin jumped. "You fool! You goddamn fool! Why did you come to town?" "I will not be your prisoner. Levi!" "You would rather be his?" he roared. "He is not some phantom from the east. He is here, in town, and that woman just told him exactly where to find you. She probably told him you are living here, alone, with me." He was pacing, his movements jerky, animalistic. He was a man in a cage. "He knows my name," he muttered. "Thorne. He will see the name on the deed. He will think I am related. He will... God." He stopped and looked at her. The anger in his eyes was turning to something colder. Fear and blame. "He will not just bring the law. Clara, he will bring ruin. He will bring everything I left in Tennessee. He will bring it all right here." "That is not my fault. It is your fault. You lied to me. You came here under a false name. You brought your scandal to my door. You, with your fine dresses and your Eastern lies." "I had no lies. I told you the truth." You told me when it was too late. You think I would have let you stay, knowing you had a husband and a bounty on your head? You think I would have touched you?" The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. I never asked you to," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You did not have to ask," he snapped hard. You came here, all quiet and broken. And you ruined me. You have brought ruin to this place." The word hit her again. Ruined. "I never asked for your protection," she screamed, the words tearing out of her. "I never asked for you to save me. I was fine on my own. You are the one who would not let me leave. You are the one who pinned me in the barn. You are the one who... You are no better than he is." He slapped her. The sound was sharp, brutal, final. Clara stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek. The shock was so profound. It stole her breath. The man who had gently cleaned her wounds, the man who had held her in the storm, had struck her. Levi stared at his own hand, horror dawning on his face. "Clara, I did not." She looked at him, her eyes wide, tears of betrayal and rage welling up. "Get out," she whispered. "Clara, get out," she screamed, and she flew at him, her fists beating against his chest, a wild, wordless cry tearing from her throat. He grabbed her wrists, stopping the assault. He was immensely strong. He held her, her body rigid, her breath coming in ragged sobs. They stood locked like that, his face a mask of shame and self-loathing, hers a mask of pure, shattered pain. I am sorry," he breathed. God, I am sorry." The fight was over. The anger was gone, burned out, leaving only the wreckage. He did not let her go. He just held her wrists. Slowly, his grip softened. He ran his thumbs over the pulse points on her wrists. "You have ruined me, Clara," he whispered again. But this time, the word meant something else. It meant, "You have broken me open." "You have ruined me too," she sobbed. He pulled her against him. Not in passion, in a desperate mutual collapse. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body shaking. "What are we going to do?" she cried against his shirt. "I do not know." He lifted her, as he had in the storm, but this time it was not with hunger. It was with a tenderness that was almost painful. He carried her to his own bedroll by the fire, laying her down as if she were made of glass. He lay down beside her, pulling the heavy blankets over them both. The encounter that followed was not like the others. It was not the desperate fire of the storm, or the shared surrender after the fight in town. It was slow, it was sad, it was tender and shattering. He kissed the cheek he had struck, his mouth lingering, a silent apology. He kissed the tears from her eyes. She held his face in her hands, her fingers tracing the scars she could not see in the dark. It was a chapel of broken confessions. "I am afraid," she whispered, in the dark. "Not of him. I am afraid of going back. I am afraid of being that person again." "I will not let him take you," he breathed against her throat. "I killed 2 men for my brother. I will kill again for you." "No," she sobbed, clinging to him. "No more killing, no more running. I cannot be the reason you are damned." He held her, their bodies moving in a slow, mourn-lil rhythm, a final, desperate communion. There were no more words. There was only the warmth of their skin against the cold, and the knowledge that the world was coming to tear them apart. It was a farewell. It was a prayer. It was the only truth they had left. When Clara woke, the sun was just beginning to touch the horizon. The place beside her was empty. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her. The fire was dead, just gray ashes. The house was cold and still. "Levi?" The silence that answered her was absolute. She scrambled up, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She ran to the door. The wagon was gone, His best horse, the strong bay, was gone from the corral. She ran to the barn. His saddle was missing. His rifle was gone from the rack by the door. His bedroll was gone. He had left. He had not said where he was going. He had not said if he was coming back. He had taken her truth. He had taken her body, and he had left her. Clara sank to her knees in the hay, the smell of horse and old leather surrounding her. The cold of the morning seeped into her bones. He had left her to face the bounty hunter alone. She had refused to run with him. So he had run from her. She was truly, finally alone. For 3 days, the ranch was a tomb. Clara moved through the cold, silent house, a ghost in her own life. The silence left by Levi was worse than the wind, worse than the snow. It was a hollow, aching void. He had taken her, broken her, and abandoned her. The slap on her cheek had faded, but the mark on her soul was permanent. She did the work. She fed the horses, her hands mechanical. She kept the fire, her eyes glued to the window. She was not watching for him. She was watching for Mr. Cobb. She was alone. She was the one who had refused to run, and he was the one who had fled. The irony was a bitter ash in her mouth. She slept in her own cot. The door bolted. Levi's rifle, he had left his spare, on the floor beside her. She was terrified. On the 3rd day, at dusk, she was in the barn, forking hay. The barn was the only place that felt remotely safe. It smelled of him, of leather and hard work. She heard a horse. Not a walk, a tired, stumbling plod. Her heart stopped. She grabbed the pitchfork, her knuckles white, and backed into the shadows of a stall. It was Mr. Cobb. He had come. A man's figure blocked the light in the doorway. He staggered, catching himself on the doorframe. "Clara?" It was Levi. She did not move. She just stared. He was not the man who had left. He was a ruin. His coat was torn. His shirt was stiff with dried blood, not his own. A long, stitched gash ran from his eyebrow to his temple, the work of a clumsy needle. His knuckles were raw meat. He looked as if he had been dragged behind a horse for 20 miles. He saw her, saw the pitchfork in her hands. He gave a short, harsh breath that might have been a laugh. "You do not need that," he rasped. "Not for me." He stumbled to the water trough, plunged his head and shoulders into the icy water, and came up sputtering, shaking his head like a wounded animal. She finally found her voice, a whisper of rage and relief. "Where were you?" "Cheyenne," he said. He leaned against a post, his whole body trembling with exhaustion. "Cheyenne? You left me! You ran!" He looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes was bottomless. "I did not run from you, Clara! I ran to him! I went to find Cobb!" She lowered the pitchfork. "You what?" "The servant, Mrs. Poole. She was at the hotel in Laramie. I had a talk with Hatcher. He told me she was bragging about finding you, about the reward. She was meeting Cobb in Cheyenne to collect her part." "You rode to Cheyenne? That is 2 days." "I did it in 1.5. I found the hotel. He was there, with her." He did not need to tell her the rest. She could see it. He had not gone to talk. He had gone to finish it. He had taken the fight she had refused to run from, and he had met it head on, in his own way. "What did you do, Levi?" "I waited. He left the hotel. I followed him to the livery. We had a talk." "You fought him?" "It was not a fight," Levi said, his voice flat. "It was a correction. He is a reasonable man. I explained that $500 was not enough. I explained that if he ever came near you, if he even spoke your name to another man, I would ride to Philadelphia, I would find the judge, and I would finish what I started in Tennessee." He pushed himself off the post, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. "He was very understanding. He gave me his word. He is taking the morning train back east, Mrs. Poole, too. He had done it. He had done the one thing he knew how to do. He had met the threat with such overwhelming, brutal violence that he had terrified it into submission. He took a step toward her and stumbled. She rushed forward, catching his arm. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight of muscle and bone. "You are hurt." "He had a knife," Levi muttered, "but he was slow with it." She half dragged him toward the house. The rage was gone, replaced by a deep, aching comprehension. This was his love. It was not gentle, it was not kind, it was violent and absolute, and it had just saved her. She got him inside, pushed him into the chair by the fire. She brought the basin, the whiskey, the needle and thread. "This will hurt," she said, looking at the gash on his brow. It was poorly stitched, probably by his own hand. "It is not the first time," he said. She cut the clumsy stitches and began to clean the wound. He did not flinch. He just watched her, his eyes dark, his face close to hers. "They will not come back," he whispered. "They are afraid of me now." "I know," she said, her hand steady as she pulled the needle through his skin. She had just tied off the last stitch when a new sound came. A horse, walking steady. A jingle of tack. Levi was on his feet in an instant, pushing her behind him, his hand moving to the knife on his belt. "It is just one rider," Clara said, peering through the window. A man in a worn coat with a tin star pinned to it was dismounting. "It is the sheriff," Levi said, his voice flat. "Sheriff Brody." Levi opened the door before the man could knock. "Thorne," the sheriff said. He was a man in his 50s, with a face that had seen too much wind and not enough joy. He looked past Levi and saw Clara. His gaze was uncomfortable. "Ma'am." "What do you want, Brody?" Levi's voice was hostile. "I am not here for trouble. Levi, I am here on business." He pulled a sheaf of papers from his coat. They were damp. "The telegraph office has been busy all morning. From back east. From a Judge Elias Thorne and a Mr. Whitmore." Clara's blood turned to water. She gripped the back of the chair. Cobb had lost the fight, but he had won the war. He had sent the telegrams before Levi found him. "It seems," Sheriff Brody said, his eyes on his boots, "that there is a formal complaint from her father and a legal writ from her husband." Levi did not move. "A writ for what?" "For her return. It claims she is not of sound mind, ma'am, that she fled her home in a state of delusion. It instructs any and all legal authority to detain her and return her to her husband's care." "That is a lie," Clara whispered. "I am sure it is, ma'am, but it is a legal, binding document from a federal judge. It carries a lot of weight. More weight than I have." "So you are here to take her," Levi said. It was not a question. "I am here," Brody said, finally looking up, his eyes pained, "to order you both to town. There is a circuit judge, Miller, in from Cheyenne. He is handling the inquiry. Tomorrow, at 10 o'clock. He will hear the case." "And if we do not come?" Levi asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Then I will have to come back, Levi, and I will have to bring deputies. And it will get ugly. Please, just come to town, tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Levi stared at the sheriff, his face unreadable. "Get off my land, Brody." The sheriff nodded, relieved. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode away, a lone, dark figure against the snow. Levi shut the door. The latch clicking into place was the loudest sound Clara had ever heard. The fight was not over. The bounty hunter was gone, but the law was here. Clara sank to the floor, her legs giving way. The room tilted. She was going back. They were going to drag her back. Back to the judge, back to the dark room, back to the whispers. "I cannot go back," she said, her voice a hollow shell. She looked up at Levi, her eyes wide with a terror that was absolute. "Levi, I will not survive it. I will die first." Levi stood over her, his new stitches pulling his face into a grimace. He had fought a man and won. But this was paper. This was the law. This was the East, reaching its long, clean hands into his world, and he could not put a knife to it. He looked down at her, at the raw terror on her face. He saw the truth of her words. She would not survive. He knelt in front of her, his body aching, his heart a cold, hard knot. He had made a promise to himself in Tennessee that he would never again be the reason for ruin, and he had failed. He put his arms around her, pulling her against his bloody, torn shirt. He held her as she shook, his grip the only solid thing in her world. "Then they will have to take us both," he whispered into her hair. "I will not let you go." The ride to town the next morning was silent. It was a funeral procession. Levi was cleaned up, his face set in a hard mask. He wore his good coat, and his gun was holstered at his hip. Clara wore her only spare dress, her hair pinned up, her face pale but composed. She would not go to this as a victim. When they reached Laramie Junction, the main street was full. It was not a lynch mob. It was just people. They were standing outside the sheriff's office, where the inquiry was to be held. Mrs. Hatcher was on the porch of the general store, her arms crossed. Mr. Hatcher was sweeping the walk, his movements jerky. They expected to be met with jeers, with whispers, with the cold superiority of righteous gossip. But as Levi helped Clara down from the wagon, the whispers were different. They were low, angry. Mr. Hatcher stopped sweeping. He approached them, his face screwed up in, was it shame? "Thorne," he said, not looking at Clara. That woman, the servant, Poole. She was in my store again yesterday. Before she left, she was talking a lot about that judge, about this." He gestured to Clara. It did not sound right, what she was saying. It sounded mean. From the crowd, another man stepped forward, a young man in a cheap suit, his face earnest. "Mr. Thorne, my name is Evans. I am an attorney, of sorts. I practice here. I saw the telegrams at the station. This is highly irregular. A writ of this nature, across territories. Judge Miller is a practical man, but the pressure is significant. I would be willing to advise you, if you wish." "For how much?" Levi asked, his voice flat. "My fee is $2, Mr. Evans said, flushing. I do not hold with this kind of Eastern meddling." Levi nodded once. "We thank you." Then the crowd parted. Mrs. Agatha Hale, the town's most prominent widow, draped in severe black, walked toward them. She had been the moral center of Laramie Junction for 20 years. Her face was a stern, carved mask of piety. Clara's heart sank. This was it, the final judgment. Mrs. Hale stopped, not in front of Levi, but in front of Clara. She looked at her, woman to woman, her eyes sharp, missing nothing. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "Yes, ma'am," Clara whispered. "They call you a ruined woman. I have heard the gossip. I heard what that woman from the East said. I also saw what happened in Mr. Hatcher's store 2 weeks ago. With Silas, I was present." Clara stared at her, uncomprehending. "My daughter, Elspeth," Mrs. Hale said, her voice softening, just a fraction. "You may have heard, I sent her east for schooling. In Boston, she fell in with a man, a professor, a married man. He took advantage of her. He promised her things. When the scandal broke, the school sent her home, in disgrace. Mrs. Hale's eyes were distant, looking at a pain Clara knew all too well. They used the same words for her: ruined, tainted, of unsound mind. My Elspeth. She was not strong. She believed them. She took her own life. Last January, buried up on the hill. She looked back at Clara, her gaze fierce. I know what those words mean, child. They are the words men use to bury women they have already broken. She reached out and touched Clara's arm. You will come with me. You will not face this alone. The sheriff's office was packed. It was hot, smelling of stale coffee, wet wool, and fear. Judge Miller was a fat, tired man with a drooping mustache. He looked at the stack of telegrams on his desk and sighed. He looked at Levi, at Mr. Evans, at Clara and Mrs. Hale, and sighed again. Let us get this over with, he said. The case was simple. A representative from the Pinkerton agency, a thin man in a bowler hat, presented the writ. Judge Thorne merely wishes for the safe return of his wife, who is unwell. He is prepared to pay all costs for her transport. Mr. Evans stood. Judge Miller, the jurisdiction here is unclear. Mrs. Whitmore is a resident of Wyoming Territory, and she is the wife of a resident of Philadelphia. The judge snapped. He was clearly intimidated by the telegrams. A wife's residence is her husband's. This is the law. Mr. Evans, do you dispute the marriage? No, sir, but... Then I do not see what there is to discuss. I do, Clara said, her voice quiet. Everyone looked at her. Speak, then, ma'am, the judge said, impatient. My husband, he assaulted me. I ran to save my life. If you send me back, you are sending me to my death. He will put me away, in an asylum, or he will kill me himself. He is a man of great power and great cruelty. The judge looked uncomfortable. Those are serious accusations, Mrs. Whitmore, but they are for a Philadelphia court to decide, not a territorial one. My hands are tied. Are they? Mrs. Hale's voice cut through the room. She stood. The entire room was silent. Judge Miller, you knew my Elspeth. The judge's face went pale. Agatha, this is not... This is exactly that, she said, her voice ringing with a terrible, cold anger. You sat in my parlor. You drank my tea. You told me it was a tragedy. But you did nothing. The law did nothing, because he was a professor, a man of power, and she was just a ruined girl. She pointed a black-gloved finger at the Pinkerton agent. This is not law. This is money. This is Eastern power, telling us how to manage our own... You call this woman of unsound mind? I saw her stand up to Silas. I saw Mr. Thorne here defend her, when every other man in that store was a coward. This is not a madwoman. This is a woman who has found the grit to survive. She turned to the judge. We are a long way from Philadelphia. We are a hard people, but we are a just people. Or we try to be. Are you going to send this child back to the man who broke her? Just because he is rich? Is that the law in Wyoming? Because it is not a law I will respect, and I do not think I am alone. A low murmur went through the room. Mr. Hatcher nodded. The sheriff, Brody, pointedly stared at the floor. Judge Miller was trapped. He looked at the telegrams. He looked at the stone-cold face of Mrs. Hale. He looked at Levi, his hand resting on the butt of his gun, not as a threat, but as a fact. He took a deep breath. He was, at his core, a politician. The writ, he said, tapping the papers. It is complex. The accusations of mental instability require proof. The signature from the physician is... It is smudged. Mr. Evans almost smiled. I cannot, in good conscience, enforce this writ without further testimony from the accusing parties. In person. He slammed his gavel. I am delaying this warrant indefinitely. Pending review, Mrs. Whitmore. You are to remain in the custody of Laramie County. You are not to leave the territory. This inquiry is closed. It was not a victory. It was a reprieve. It was time. Clara fell back into her chair. A sob of pure, unadulterated relief tearing from her chest. Mrs. Hale put a hand on her shoulder. They walked out of the office. The crowd was silent, watching. Clara stood on the boardwalk, breathing in the cold, free air. She was shaking. Levi came to stand beside her. He looked stunned. He had come ready for a gunfight. He had come ready to die, and he had been saved by a room full of words, by a widow's grief and a town's stubborn pride. He looked at Clara. Her face was wet with tears, her hair coming loose from its pins. She was beautiful. She was his. And he did not care who was watching. In the middle of the street, in front of Mrs. Hatcher and Sheriff Brody and the men who had whispered, Levi Thorne reached for his woman. He pulled her to him, his hands hard on her waist. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not the hungry kiss of the barn. It was not the sad farewell in the dark. It was a brand. It was a claim. It was a promise. It was fierce and beautiful and defiant. He was kissing her in the open, in front of the entire town, sealing their fate. He lifted his head. Her eyes were open, wide with shock and a dawning, brilliant hope. Let us go home, he said, his voice rough. The kiss on the main street of Laramie Junction was a declaration, but it was not a conclusion. They rode back to the ranch in a new, profound silence. He had claimed her in front of the world. The town had, in its own grudging, gritty way, stood for her. She was safe, for now. The reprieve from Judge Miller was not a pardon. It was a pause. The law was still a coiled snake, waiting. That night, they came together not with the desperation of the storm or the sadness of their confessions, but with a quiet, mutual claiming. He did not unroll his bedroll by the fire. He followed her up the stairs. He came to her cot, and for the first time, their union was one of tenderness. It was a promise sealed in the dark. But as Clara lay awake afterward, Levi's heavy arm across her waist, his breathing deep and steady, the peace would not settle. She was safe behind him. She was safe because of him. She was safe because a good woman's tragedy, Mrs. Hale's tragedy, had given her shelter. She was still, in the eyes of the law, a fugitive. She was still, in the eyes of her family, a disgrace. She had not won, she had hidden. And Levi, he had killed for his brother. He had nearly killed for her. He had offered to kill again. He lived on a knife's edge, his past a shadow he could never outrun. She had brought her own shadow to his door. And now they were two fugitives, hiding in a fragile circle of light. She could not live like that, and she would not let him live like that. The grit she had learned on this hard land, the strength she had found in his arms, it was not for hiding. It was for fighting. 2 days later, before the first hint of gray light touched the snow, Clara slipped from the bed. She moved with a silence she had learned from him. She dressed in the cold dark, her fingers steady. She went downstairs, by the low glow of the dying embers in the stove. She sat at the table. She took a sheet of paper and the pen. My dearest Levi. She wrote the words, the first endearment she had ever put to paper for him. You did not run from my fight. You ran to it. You saved my life. You gave me a home when I had none. And you gave me your strength when I had lost my own. I love you for it. I love you more than I have words to say. But I am still Mrs. Elias Thorne. I am still a woman accused. The town gave us a reprieve, but it is not a pardon. The law is still on his side. We are living on borrowed time, and when that time runs out, they will come back, and you, in your terrible, beautiful way, will try to stop them, and they will kill you for it. Or they will hang you, I cannot be the reason you are damned. I cannot be the ruin you once called me. You told me you ran from Tennessee. I am done running. I am going east. I am going back to Philadelphia. I will not be a whispered scandal. I will be a voice. I will face my husband. I will face my father. I will tell the truth. Not in a dusty office in Wyoming, but where the lie began. I must do this, not just to save you, but to save myself. I must bring my sister, Anne, away from that house. She is the last good thing there. Do not follow me. This is not your fight. You have already fought it for me. This one is mine. Your strength has shown me that I have my own. Wait for me. I am not leaving you. I am going so that I can return. I want to come back to you. Levi, but I will come back as Clara. Not as a fugitive. Not as a ruined wife. Just as Clara. Strong and free. Wait for me. She folded the letter and left it on the table, weighted down by the tin mug he drank from every morning. She took the quieter of the two geldings. She took her small carpet bag, the bread she had baked yesterday, and the last of her wages, which he had insisted on paying her. She did not take his rifle. She did not take anything else. She led the horse out of the barn, her boots quiet in the snow. She mounted, and for a long moment, she looked at the dark house, at the window of the room where he slept. I will come back, she whispered to the wind. She rode out, keeping to the low ground, pointing the horse east, toward the rising sun. When Levi woke, the spot beside him was cold. He felt the absence before he was even fully awake, a sudden, sharp void. Clara? The house was silent. He went downstairs, his stockinged feet cold on the pine. He saw the letter. He read it once. His vision blurred. He read it again. The words, "Do not follow me, and I love you, and I will come back," warred in his head. His first instinct was a primal, blinding rage. He grabbed his coat. He would get the bay. He could catch her before she reached the train. He could drag her back, kicking and screaming if he had to. He ran to the barn, his boots unlaced. He saw the empty stall. He saw her saddle was gone. He stopped, his hand on the barn door. This is not your fight. He leaned his forehead against the rough wood, the splinters digging into his skin. He had told her of Tennessee. He had told her of the moment he had chosen violence. And she, in her own way, had just done the same. She was choosing her own battle. But she was not him. She was walking into the lion's den with no weapon but the truth. And the truth, in his experience, was the first thing to die in a fight. He looked east, at the pale, watercolor dawn. She was out there, alone. Wait for me. He turned from the door, his gut a cold knot of terror. He could not follow. To follow would be to tell her he did not believe she could. It would be to say her strength was not enough. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Harder than Tennessee, harder than facing Cobb. He went to the woodpile. He picked up the axe, and in the freezing dawn, Levi Thorne began to wait. He did not pray. He was not a man who knew God. He worked. He worked until his hands bled. He fixed every fence post on the property. He rebuilt the collapsed shed, his hammer blows echoing in the vast, empty silence. He rode out at dawn and came back at dusk, exhausted, only to face the crushing emptiness of the house. Her smell lingered for a week, the scent of lye soap and lavender. Then it faded. He sat at the table at night, staring at the chair she had sat in. He would reach for a mug, expecting her to be there to pour the coffee. The winter broke, the great thaw came, turning the ranch into a sea of mud. The snow melted, running in rivers down the gullies. He watched it go, a knot of fear in his chest. The roads were clear, the trains were running. Mrs. Hale rode out one afternoon. She found him mending tack in the barn. She is gone, is she not? The widow said. It was not a question. Levi just nodded, his hands not stopping their work. You let her go. I did not stop her. That is not the same thing. Mrs. Hale said, her eyes sharp. "You are a fool. Levi Thorne, or you are the strongest man I have ever met. I am not sure which." She went to face them," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Then God help them." "Mrs.," Hale said. She left a loaf of bread on the rail and rode away. Spring arrived. It did not come gently. It burst from the ground. The brittle brown grasslands turned a shade of fierce, impossible green. The skeleton trees along the creek bed grew leaves. The air, which had been so cold and sharp, turned soft, smelling of wet earth and new life. The land was healing, but the house was still empty. He had heard nothing, not a letter, not a word. The mail wagon came, and he would ride out to meet it, his heart hammering. And there would be nothing, just the general store circular. He began to believe she was dead, that the judge had done what she feared, that he had buried her in an asylum or in the ground. The thought was a cold, constant companion. He worked, he ate, he slept, but he was hollow. He was a shell of a man, waiting for a ghost. It was late May. He was branding the new calves, the air thick with the smell of smoke and seared hide. He was working alone, his movements fast and angry. He heard riders. He dropped the brand, his hand flying to his gun. He moved to the edge of the corral. His eyes narrowed, scanning the low rise to the south. Two figures. They were riding slow. They were not men. He froze. They were too far to see clearly, but one of them sat a horse the way he remembered, straight-backed, proud. He vaulted the corral fence. He began to walk. Then he began to run. They were closer now. It was her. It was Clara, and she was not alone. The person beside her was smaller, a girl, thin, with dark hair. He stopped, his chest tight, afraid to breathe, afraid it was a mirage, afraid the loneliness had finally broken his mind. They rode into the ranch yard. Clara pulled her horse to a stop. She did not get down. She just looked at him. She was changed. She was not the pale, haunted woman who had left. Her face was sunburnt. She was thinner, her dress worn from travel. There were new lines around her eyes, lines of hardship and resolve. But her eyes were clear. They were free. The girl beside her looked terrified, but she looked at Clara with a fierce, unwavering devotion. "Anne," Clara said, her voice hoarse from the dust. "This is Levi Thorne." This was her sister. She had done it. She had gone into the den and she had come back, and she had brought her sister with her. Levi did not speak. He could not. He walked forward, his boots heavy. He stopped beside her horse. He looked up at her. He reached up, his hand calloused, dirty from the branding. He touched her face. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "It was real. She was real. She was here." Clara's composure broke. A single sob tore from her. Then another. She did not move to hide her face. She just wept, the tears washing paths of clean skin through the dust. "You came back," he whispered. "I told you I would," she cried. She slid from the saddle, not waiting for his help. She did not fall into his arms. She grabbed his shirt, his rough, smoky, sweat-soaked shirt, and pulled him toward the barn. "Anne, water the horses. We will be a moment." The girl nodded, her eyes wide, and took the reins. Clara dragged Levi into the familiar, dim warmth of the barn, into their chapel. She pushed the door closed, leaving it open just a crack. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light. She turned to face him. "I never forgot," she said, her voice shaking. "In all those months, in the lawyer's offices, in my father's house, I never forgot what we built here, in this barn. You, me, it was the only true thing I had." He looked at her, at the strength that was rolling off her. She was not the same woman. She was whole. "What happened?" he asked. I told the truth, she said simply. I went to the newspapers. I went to a different judge, one my husband did not own. I had help, Mrs. Hale. She wrote a letter to a friend in Philadelphia, a woman of influence. It became a scandal, but this time, it was his scandal, not mine. My father, he disowned me, but he let Anne go. He was afraid, and the judge, he will not be a judge for much longer. I am free. Levi, the marriage is dissolved. I am free. She said the word free as if it was a sacred thing. He pulled her to him, his arms closing around her, burying his face in her dusty hair. He smelled of sun and dust and her. You came back, he said again, the words a prayer of thanks. He kissed her, and it was not the frantic, desperate kiss of the storm. It was not the defiant claim in the street. It was reverence. He kissed her as if he was drinking water after a drought. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her arms locked around his neck. He carried her to the empty stall, to the clean hay, and he laid her down. They made love. It was not rushed. It was not frantic. It was a rediscovery. Every touch was a question. Are you real? Every kiss was an answer. I am here. It was slow and deep and healing. It was the love of two people who had been to hell and back, who had chosen each other, and who had, finally, earned the peace they were taking. It was every silent month of waiting, every mile she had ridden, every fear they had both faced alone, all culminating in this single, perfect, reverent moment. Every touch said, "You are home." Later, they lay in the hay, the afternoon sun slanting through the cracks in the walls. Clara sat up, brushing hay from her hair. She looked happier, more at peace than he had ever seen her. She reached for her carpet bag, which she had dropped by the door. She pulled something from it. It was her old Eastern corset, a stiff, whaleboned thing of gray silk, the armor of her old life, the cage she had lived in. She stood. She walked to an empty nail on the barn wall, a nail where he usually hung a bridle, and she hung the corset on it. It looked ridiculous, a piece of dead formal history in a barn that smelled of life. Dust swirled in the light, settling on the silk. Levi pulled his trousers on. Walking to stand behind her, he put his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his bare chest. You staying this time? He asked, his voice low, his chin resting on her shoulder. She smiled. She turned in his arms to face him, her hands on his chest. Try to make me leave. He kissed her, a long, slow kiss that tasted of forever. Outside, the prairie wind howled, a lonely, wild sound. But inside the barn, the doors closed, and there was only warmth. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope it touched your heart. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please, leave a comment and let me know. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of the heart, from the heart of the frontier. And please, share your thoughts in English. What did Clara and Levi's journey mean to you?